tell my younger self as far as writing stuff, because a lot of this stuff is organic. You learn it as you go.
It's strange. It's nothing I ever expected.
I want to tell my stories by eliciting emotion in my audience.
So it's an organic process. They sort of layer on top of each other. Each one makes the next layer more obvious to me.
This whole thing could not have gone any smoother.
I usually say squat only in groups of 3. I like to batch it, like squat, squat, squat.
Look, guys, this one's not going to be like normal. It's just not.
Welcome to the Writer's Journey. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the mellifluous Kaden Williams.
There's a big difference. It's like, are you talking or are you doing? What's happening here?
We still have all the pets that think, oh, it's time to eat. It doesn't matter if it's 4 a.m.
My name is Walt, and this is Coffee and Concepts on Keystroke Medium.
All right, I just finished chapter 10. Hey, everybody.
Hey, you're done.
Hi.
Welcome all the Keystroke Medium people. We're going to talk again about Dragonbone Chair. All three of us, Lauren, Ken, and myself, have diligently studied the next 5 chapters of the book. I think we're ready to go.
Oh, yeah, so ready.
All right, yes, absolutely, very much. I did have to read a little bit right at the end here. I had to cram up. So last week I had a jiu-jitsu seminar that was like 4 days, and so I didn't mow the yard, and which means I didn't do any as much audiobook stuff. So I did, like we talked about last time, I was reading from the book more than listening. It was a little bit different, so that was interesting. But yeah, good to go.
Got to catch up on either mowing the yard or reading the book. That's a tough choice.
Right. Well, yeah, tomorrow I'm going to be mowing because my grass is like 4 feet tall and it's 1,000 degrees. So it's going to be great.
And then you can just do both, right?
Yeah, I know. And I'll listen to probably, I think I did like 3 or 4 chapters last time I went.
I think you did. We got to get going.
Very excited. So what are we talking about today?
Okay, so we're talking about chapters 6 through 10 of the Dragonbone Chair. This is book 1 in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy by Tad Williams, a series that was written in the late 80s, early 90s. We had Tad Williams on a few weeks ago, and really, after reading his sequel trilogy this year, really got excited to go back and revisit Osten Ard as it was when Simon was a kid rather than when he was much older. Spoiler, slight spoilers, but he is the main character.
Yeah, there he is. We did forget Trucker Charlie gets the golf clap for being the first person.
Yes, he does.
Welcome, Charlie. Hope you're driving safe. Or you're at home all day today. Fantastic.
Yeah, he's home, so he can enjoy this.
Excellent.
So,
good deal.
So just to recap, in chapter 5, I think we saw that Simon met, I think, Pirates, and Cadrak, the monk or the brother, and then we got a geography lesson, right? when he climbed the tower, and it's like, here's we can see all of Erkenland, right? And then Malachias was the strange character at the end.
Right. And when you say met Pirates, was that the scene with the dog, or is that later?
No, that's this coming chapter actually.
That's today.
This was passing through, and that was on a reread. That was a little bit difficult to stomach, right?
Well, I know that's like very, very direct in the action and villainy compared to the rest of the style that we're doing here.
So in chapter 6, this is where we don't quite get to, we do get to the passing of Prester John, who is the king of the High King Osten Ard. But it starts with the brother or the son talking to Dr. Morganis about what can he do to make his father, not hurt, right? And
right.
Was an interesting conversation because it was with Joshua, right? Not with
right.
Elias, the elder brother who's going to be king, right? And as we talked about in the last book chat, the starting point of the story is kind of a little bit of the concept of the end of King Arthur's reign, right? Where he passes to his sons. And this is the beginning of that kind of concept where Prester John has lived, I think he was 90-ish.
Yeah.
Which is a very long time, even in a medieval type world, right? I'm not sure.
He's reigned forever.
Yes, he's reigned forever. And it is a passing of an era, and they're planning for this, and the story is still in that get the pieces out onto the board, right? Things are still moving very slow burn, still building the world. You need the pieces, not only the pieces, but all the tension that's going on in between the two pieces.
So in the paper, the chapter starts on page 69. So we're 7 pages. We're setting the stage.
Yep. I think we get a couple new POVs, right? The lector, which I didn't get an idea of what kind of person he was, but did you get anything from that, Lauren? I don't know if he was like a pope or an archbishop, or I don't know.
Which character?
The lector.
Oh.
Remember him? He has a very short scene in chapter 6.
Yeah, he has pretty short. I didn't pick up. Oh, yeah, yeah, because he does the funeral too. He seems like a good-hearted guy, and he basically good-hearted guy with a similar religion to. It's kind of like a Christian analog, sort of. There's similarities there.
Yeah, you get a little bit of geopolitical tension there, right? Because he's ruled for so long, and he's ruled as almost like a Holy Roman Emperor, right? Where he's direct hand of the church. And now what's the passing going to mean for both the kingdom and the church?
Right.
At least that's how I took it.
The Edenite Church.
Yep, the Edenite Church. Yep.
Yeah, there's somewhat of a feudal kind of system set up. Chapter 6 called The Cairn on the Cliffs. And we find out what the chapter is all about, and it's going to be the funeral. But the funeral is at like the heart of the chapter, and then it takes you through the different scenes kind of leading up to it and during it, and then the fallout after the king's death. And it goes from different characters' point of views that are kind of like circling this one event, which I found really interesting because, like you said, we're still meeting all the cast of characters for the entire book. We're laying out the chess pieces, if you will, and starting to lay out those clues that are going to become important later. And they're all surrounding this one man who's passed away, and that's the king.
Yes. We get a second new POV this time, right? Duke Isgrimnur, who's an interesting character, right? He's very, he's the template of the heathen or the pagan who's become an Edenite, right?
Right. He's kind of gruff and rough and, barbarian living in Rome type of guy.
Yes. I like his character. He becomes important to the overall story. If you remember Scott and Lauren, I think you'll enjoy him. He's a good character, and another character that we'll see later on are both again kind of key. There are all these characters. None of these characters that you see right now are really. You see a lot of conflict. It's not. You don't get a lot of George R. R. Martin. You really like this character? We're gonna get rid of him.
Yeah. Not yet. Been killed as soon as you start.
Not yet. We're still building.
Yeah.
But when we get the POVs, from the different characters, especially like Duke Scribner, you kind of get behind the scenes, like you can pull aside the curtain and figure out, what's really going on in their heads and what their characters like, and also their perspective, which is sometimes wrong. Like sometimes they make mistakes as they look at what other characters are doing, and they kind of make assumptions about why they're doing it or not, and the reader is left reading that and going, can I trust this clue that was laid down for me or not?
Yeah, and you need that. You need those extra POVs that have that information and have those thoughts, because Simon, he's only 14 and he has none of that.
Right.
He doesn't know anything outside the castle, right? Outside of stories. So you need to put the reader in the head of other people that can bring, that past or the knowledge or just a lot of the weight of the king and like I said, the geopolitical situation of the world to the reader.
Right.
Yeah. I saw some of that come out in particular during the funeral, right? Because you see the different characters. Can we jump to that part, to that scene?
That is in the scene.
Jumping
Yeah.
ahead?
Yeah. That's actually, I think, where we really first meet Duke Grimner, which is at the funeral, right?
Right.
Where he's
a hugely visual
performs
scene.
Some of the right. Yes. But one thing I did like about that, before I jump it over to you, is again, it's another allusion to the Arthurian myth, which is remember when King Arthur was mortally wounded, he was put on a boat and taken to the Isle of Avalon. Right?
Oh, right.
So Prester John was placed in the boat that he came to Erkenland in, right?
A little boat.
But instead of putting him in the sea, though, bury him in the ground.
They bury him,
Was it 40 people that carried the boat? There's a whole bunch of people that carried the boat to the fire.
It wasn't a little boat,
No.
but it wasn't like a massive ship either, right? It was kind of
little for going across the ocean, but not so small to carry.
Yeah, it made me think of one of those Polynesian ships that were used to do cross the ocean between island chains. Yeah. That was the Sea Arrow, and I didn't remember the scene, but I was like, oh, this is going to be like a Boromir or Arthur. And they're going to put him in the water, and no, wait, they put him in the boat.
Yeah, I was waiting for that too. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They buried him with the sword.
With the sword, with Brightnail, right?
Which is a key plot point, I'm assuming.
Yes, and that actually becomes an argument between, I think, the Duke and the new king, right?
Yeah. Because he asked him at some point, he's like, why don't you have the sword?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Lauren, on this chapter? I mean, I think it continues on to not only the death, the funeral, but the funeral just didn't happen the next day, right? It took like a month or two for preparing the body. It laid in state in the cathedral, wrapped, and then they buried him, right?
It took time. But when I was reading this section or rereading it, because first I listened to it on audio, and you're washing dishes, I'm folding laundry or whatever, and my mind's wandering kind of in and out of the story. Sometimes getting caught up, and sometimes kind of losing focus a little bit. But when I read the book, it really pulls me into the world, and I kind of see it. With this chapter, I was really taken by how all these characters, they're kind of strangers to each other when they roll up at the funeral. They all are there for the same common purpose, but they're eyeing each other and they're sizing each other up, and they're trying to get a read on who the other people are and what's motivating them. And it reminded me of our discussion last week when we were talking about the POV, the point of view of the narration, and how the narration, you could call it third person omniscient, but it really seems to focus on each section on one character in particular. it's called Free and Indirect Discourse, where the narrator is talking and sometimes slips into the mind of one central character. And in this scene, it is the Duke. It's Duke Scribner. So I wanted to read part of the
go ahead.
Scene.
Feel free. This is a book chat. We're allowed to read our favorite pieces.
Yeah. And see, what's your take on like how the Duke is kind of assessing the other characters, and do you think he's right or not? And if not, like why not? All right, so it's just the scene kind of leading right into the funeral. As he approached Sea Arrow, he looked one last time at his king. Although paler than a dove's breast, still John looked so stern and fine and full of sleeping life that a Scribner caught himself worrying for his old friend, lying out in the wind this way with no blanket. For a moment, he almost smiled. John always said I had the heart of a bear and the wit of an ox, the Scribner chided himself. And if it be cold up here, think how chill it will be for him in the frozen earth. The Scribner moved carefully but nimbly around the steep ramp of earth, using a hand to steady himself when necessary. Although his back hurt him fiercely, he knew no one suspected it. He was not too old to find some pride in that. Taking John Presbyter's blue-veined feet in his hands one at a time, he slipped the boots on. He silently commended the skilled hands in the house of preparing for the ease with which his task was accomplished. Without looking again at his friend's face, he quickly took the hand and kissed it, then walked away, feeling stranger still. Suddenly it seemed to him that this was not his king's lifeless husk that was being condemned to the soil. The soul fluttered free like a newly unfurled butterfly. The suppleness of John's limbs, the so familiar face in repose, as the Scribner had seen it countless times when the king snatched an hour or two of sleep in the lull of battle. All these things made him feel as though he deserted a living friend. He knew John was dead. He had held the king's hand as the last breath fluted out of him, but still he felt a traitor. So possessed was he by his thoughts that he nearly stepped into Prince Joshua, who moved nimbly around him on his path to the barrow. The Scribner was shocked to see that Joshua carried John's sword Brightnail on a gray cloth. What happens here? The Scribner wondered. What is he doing with the sword? As the Duke reached the first row of the crowd and turned to watch, his unease deepened. Joshua had laid Brightnail on the king's chest and was clasping John's hands about the hilt. This is madness, the Duke thought. That sword is for the king's heir. I know John would have wanted Elias to have it. And even if Elias chose to bury it with his father, why does he not lay it in the grave himself? Madness. Does no one else marvel at such a thing? The Scribner looked from side to side, but saw nothing on the faces around him but sorrow. Now Elias walked down, passing his younger brother slowly, like a participant in a stately dance, as in fact he was. The heir to the throne bent over the gunwale of the boat. What he sent with his father no one could see, but it was noted by all that although a tear sparkled on Elias' cheek when he turned, Joshua's eyes were dry. The company now made one more prayer. Renesson, that's the priest dude, robes billowing in the lake breeze, sprinkled sea arrow with holy oils. Then the boat was gently lowered down the sloping pitfall, soldiers laboring in silence with their heavy staves until it lay at last a fathom deep in the earth. Above, timbers were raised into a great arch, and the workmen laid the turves about, one atop the other. Finally, as the stones were being lifted into place to complete John's cairn, the mourning party turned and made its slow way back along the cliffs above the Kinsley. So, Scribner, he's looking at the two sons, and he's kind of surprised by what he sees. The younger son lays his father's sword in the barrow. It's going to be buried with the king. Buried with the king. And why does that surprise him?
I think to him, the sword represents the kingship, right? It represents the king's might, and it should pass to the son.
Well, my question here was, I thought the sword was given to the minstrel who hid it. Did I miss where it got to Joshua somehow?
No, you didn't miss it, and you're right. That was the very first scene that you see Prester John is where he gives Bright Nail.
Yeah, he says, "Go hide it."
Right,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it says, "Take the sword," and Towser gives it. Now you see Bright Nail is in Joshua's hands.
But we never saw him give it, so I was confused if I missed
Is it
something.
bright? Is it? So the question is it Bright Nail?
That was my thought. Is it really Bright Nail, or is it some sort of distraction or sleight of hand?
We won't
Right.
find out. till
Well, and
later.
Elias, he's not upset about it, and Joshua's doing it very purposely, putting a sword anyway, right now, supposedly, in with his father.
I think it could lend itself to a couple of interpretations. Remember, Isgrimnur is a Rimmersman. He's not a Birkenlander, so maybe he doesn't understand the rituals. If you know the Arthur legend, when Arthur was mortally wounded, he told Sir Bedivere to cast Excalibur back into the lake and return it to the Lady of the Lake.
Right.
Right. So it did not pass to his family or his heirs.
Right.
So that could be another thought, is that the sword belongs to the king, not to the kingdom. I don't know. That's just a thought.
Right.
Knowing as much Arthurian legend that I do know.
Right. Well, Scribner is kind of taking it as a sign of power and maybe right, duty, maybe even obligation that should go into the hands of the next king. And Elias doesn't seem to mind that it's being buried down with his dad.
And that is curious, right? Does Elias have his own sword? Does he have his own
Well, it is
symbol?
curious because later somebody gives him a hard time about not having the king's sword, and he seems mad then. So now I'm like, did he not see? Did he not? Surely he remembers.
Right.
Well, why didn't he do something about it then? I guess.
That's a good scene because I think it's very emotional. You don't see a lot of funeral scenes that get in the mind of a character that's been a lifelong friend, burying a lifelong friend.
Right.
I don't know. I really enjoyed that scene. He's seeing the things happen around him, but he goes through the motions of the ritual, which I really enjoyed. The little twists of religious rites that had put into the story. Putting the boots on last, things like that. Which just made me think. I was like, "What are you doing? He doesn't have any shoes on."
Yeah. Scott, isn't there a saying in the West about dying with your boots on?
Yeah, died in combat.
Going out with your boots on, yeah.
Yeah, died in action.
Right, in
So to
action. But
speak.
Scrimmer said that even when he was in battle with his friend, he thought this dude's gonna die in his bed, and he did.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, he just had that kind of sentiment. Yeah, well, as a reader, I'm like, who's the good guys? Who's the bad guys? It seems like one of the sons, or maybe both, is probably going to be a bad guy. Is it?
Is it
the son who was with Dr. Morgani's earlier and asking for, drugs to help him sleep into death? I don't know, kind of.
Is he looking for? Looking for painkiller or
right?
Or a king remover.
But we're seeing that scene through Simon's eyes, who, when he meets Joshua in the room, all he can kind of feel is his disdain for him, Simon, as a young man. And he's not putting himself in the shoes of a son who could be concerned about his father's pain in his last moments. We're not sure. We don't know the answer. If this, is this concern or is this poison? But
you do get from Duke Grismer's point of view a difference in the emotional state between the two brothers, right? Joshua, teary-eyed.
Yeah.
Elias, not.
Yeah, Joshua has no tears in his eyes, but Elias does have a tear. But I noticed though that even though the Duke notes that, he himself is trying to keep in his pain right?
So it's hard to really convey, is that wrong or not? Yeah.
Yeah, as an old soldier, he's not trying to show that his back is hurting him any more than he's trying to hold back his own tears too. So another character looking at him might kind of go, is that guy sad when he really is inside, just like falling apart with sorrow over his lost friend? The pain is very real, even though he's covering it up.
I expected Joshua to be the good son and to be upset about his father dying, but it doesn't really come across that way in this scene.
Yeah, I think it's meant to be ambiguous, right? You think there is that conflict between the two brothers, but is there conflict beyond the two brothers, right? That extends to the kingdom. Right? Are they going to fight over the kingdom? George R. R. Martin post Robert Baratheon style, right?
Yeah. So what else we got in chapter 6?
They have the feast celebrating Elias's essentially ascension, right?
Mm-hmm.
The long feast. And this has a scene that is a little bit disturbing to read, but it's kind of reminds me of the opposite of the Save the Cat step in movies, right? To develop likability and deep instant empathy with a hero that you show them early on saving the cat, right?
Right.
Well,
this
said
one
save nothing.
This one to show a really bad person kick a dog.
Kick a dog.
Or worse.
But it was very interesting to me because that type of kind of graphic violence has been in no place in the entire book. And so that scene really jumped out if that was intentional or if it was a weird misstroke, because like later there's a scene where he sees smoke and then it just skips to our main character being told about these soldiers killing everybody. Whereas if you're reading George R. R. Martin or Joe Abercrombie or some of those, there would have been a character in the middle of that slaughter and you would have seen how horrible it was and been really repulsed by it. But here it's just kind of told about it. And then the main character doesn't really care because he can't really connect with it because it's just a story that he wasn't there for. I'm kind of jumping ahead.
Well, it kind of shows the what's the term, the sheltered life that Simon leads, right? He sees the burning, but he has to be told what happened.
He sees the smoke, but even when he's told, it doesn't really connect as real because he hasn't seen anything like that, I guess.
Yeah, whereas this, his mind is distracted because he's called over to help by some nobleman, right? They see a young guy standing around and they're like, come get us some wine, right? And on his way over, he's doing his task. He meets the little dog, and the reader's like, oh, a dog. This is wonderful, right? And they have a connection. And Simon's trying to be careful around the dog. The dog's trying to get underfoot. And then he sees the dog go sniffing around Pirates' feet, whom, we've already had a description of him a couple pages earlier. And
very Voldemort looking
skull.
He looks like the
eyes
villain.
were deep sunk in, like shiny black spots below his naked brows. Like he's a swaying serpent. Okay, so we're getting all kinds of demon description visuals on this guy. And now the little dog is rooting in the straw near Pirates' shiny black boots on the track of some fallen treasure. And we just know what's coming. And Simon tries to get him in line. He tries to help. But the more Simon tries to help call the dog away, he catches Pirates' attention to the dog. And then Pirates says that terrible thing. I was driving at the time when the narrator read that part. And fortunately, I was in a parking lot going slow because it was so gross.
Yeah, terrible. Well, that's the thing. And it's interesting to talk about because there's all that long description. It's all the classic villain descriptors. He describes everything about this guy's clearly a villain. He has all the villain stuff, but that one little short, because it's only a sentence or two where the action happens, where he kills the dog, and you're like, I hate this guy, and he's definitely the bad guy. And
kick the dog,
and he's dangerous, and you fear for anybody who's around him. And anytime you say that character's crazy, you're like, yeah, he's definitely crazy. He killed that little puppy. And so the value of an active scene versus description as far as impact on the reader.
Yeah.
And
whether you love it or hate it, that scene definitely was like a punch right in the gut.
Yep. And Lauren, you pointed out something that may have been missed because you're paying attention to what he's doing to the dog, but Simon is right there trying, basically helpless to really do anything, right? So
and you could almost, depending on how it was almost like he caused the dog to be harmed, because he's like tells the dog to get back from him. He's like, get away from him, leave him alone. And then the guy sees that and then does what he does.
Yeah.
So it's kind of his fault.
Did you have any favorite line? There's a lot of really good writing in this, especially since you go back and you were able to read it, Lauren. Did you have any favorite lines in this chapter? I don't know. I always like to pull out at least one or two good lines that I enjoyed.
After he kills the dog, the priest stared for a disinterested moment at the body, then lifted his gaze, his eyes alighting on Simon's horrified face. That black stare, remorseless, unconcerned, caught and held him. Pirati's flat, dead eyes flicked down again to the dog, and when they returned to Simon, a slow grin stretched across the priest's face. What can you do about it, boy? The smile said. And who cares? The priest's attention was drawn back to the table. Simon, freed, dropped the ewer and stumbled away, looking for a place to throw up.
Yeah, a good reaction. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this guy seems like a psychopath. And in contrast, poor Simon, he's so empathetic with the dog, he can't even like hold himself together.
Plus, he's a little bit drunk.
Yeah, that's true. And he's 14.
He's 14. The minstrel gave him a cup of wine too.
Yeah.
And that night, they all see a sign too in the sky.
Yeah, very, very tiny scene at the very end.
With the bearded comet? Was it
with the weird booming sound, right? That they didn't identify, right? Or was it it was the come see the star, right?
The booming one is later in a different chapter.
That's later, yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a great line in this one. Across the sky, a strange shape was painted, like a deep wound that spurted blood against the night black. A great red comet streaming across the sky from north to south. That's a great visual.
Yeah.
Like a wound in the world, right?
Some of them are cheering, and then Simon sees Dr. Morganes standing in the shadows of the Bailey wall. The old man, wrapped in a heavy robe against the chill air, did not notice his apprentice. He too was staring up at the bearded star, the scarlet slash across the vault of heaven. But unlike the others, there was no drunkenness or glee upon his face. He looked fearful, cold, and small. He looked, Simon thought, like a man alone in the wilderness, listening to the hungry song of wolves. Dun dun dun.
Dun, dun, dun. A good chapter. I mean, it covers a large span of time, right? The pending, then the death, then the funeral, and then the celebration of the king and the new king, all in I think it's about a 2-month time span. I think the king dies in what's equivalent to December, and I think they bury him in February. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of time passing.
Mm-hmm.
He does keep track of it for us at the opening of scenes and lets us know what time of the year it is. Because a lot of time passes.
And then we get chapter 7, which is the Conqueror Star, right? Which is the beginning of an auspicious beginning of a new reign, right? With the red comet and a new king, right? So it starts off, goes right into spring, right? Actually, I think it passes from spring all the way into summer, right? You see Simon's as fully becoming the apprentice of Dr. Morganes, right? And he's struggling to read and write. And I felt like that scene was a tiny little bit of inside baseball between an author and writing books.
Yeah,
I thought so too. Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was just me.
No, totally. Are we talking about page 92? Do we have the same page numbers?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, if you've got the mass-produced book, we're talking about the conversation on page 92 between Dr. McGeady and Simon about reading and education, and Simon wants to know, when does he get to learn the important stuff like magic?
Yeah, that's I felt like that was totally almost like taking away the veil. Like Ted Williams, like, I'm going to tell you what's so cool about books. You like, books are a form of magic, right? That's what he says, because they span time and distance more surely than any spell or charm. What so and so thinks about such and such 200 years ago, can you fly back through the ages and ask him? No, or at least probably not. Right? So I thought that was a little, here's what's great about books. While I'm writing you one.
Stephen King calls it telepathy in his memoir on writing. He says it's telepathy.
Really?
You're taking mind stuff and putting it in your mind stuff. It's telepathy.
Yeah.
So interesting way to look at it. So what else we got in chapter 7? We're doing
chapter 7 is so within that that same scene, there's that, again, the conflict between the mentor warning the protege about the villain, right?
Yeah, he tells
him
to
stay away from Pirates. He's a bad guy.
He's insane.
And then you get a bit more about that later on, right, in a later chapter.
Yeah.
We'll get into expanded on that. And then we move to a scene where Joshua and his Grimner spar, right? So they're fighting each other.
Right.
Which is a good little scene. Puts a little action into it, but shows that the time has passed, right? I think they're all the way back into the fall, or back into a winter, and it's unbearably hot, right? And unseasonably warm. It's been dry. It's been a bad year. That one gives me a lot of Game of Thrones vibes.
Yeah.
Of the long summer. I'm wondering if that gave George R. Martin ideas or not. I don't know.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I went and looked up the copyright date. Again, you said that it influenced him a little bit, but there's a phrase in there where it talks about it's good luck to rub the head of a dwarf or something like that. They use that a lot in Game of Thrones. They make a big deal out of that. And, I'm being a little bit cynical on it, but it feels like the author had that little thing and started kind of comparing him to a dwarf and stuff like that, but he wasn't a dwarf. So there's like, he was dwarf-like, but then they all keep treating him like he's a dwarf. And I'm curious if it's, because I've done some of my writing where you have a character that doesn't quite turn out the way you want to, and if he's trying to use these type of references, but they don't actually fit, so he's kind of trying to shoehorn them in there. But I don't know. Maybe that's just my artless reading style. But
are you thinking of George R. Martin or?
I'm talking about in this book, because later there's several things it says. There's I keep jumping to the last chapter I read, but it talks about so they were giving him a hard time. He's trying to get someplace. What's his name, Towser, and they keep trying to touch him because it's lucky to touch the head of a dwarf, but he's not a dwarf. But he describes.
He's not really a dwarf. He's just an old bent man, right?
But then as you keep reading, they keep doing that same thing, and like he got fascinated with this idea of that. But anyway, I'm way off topic.
Touch the dwarf.
Well, yeah. Tad Williams on his Twitter description, he calls himself a scarred and vengeful dwarf. So I wonder if it's like a little inside joke. But he was a lot younger then.
Well, and that yeah. So we're what came first, but anyway, so I derailed us. I'm sorry. It's where we were talking about.
You get a bit of back and forth between Joshua and his Grimner, and you find out that you find out that Joshua isn't very bad with his offhand. right? Fighting an older opponent, and there's a great line at the end of that scene which I really loved. Just says, "Do the dead always stand between the living, Uncle?" Which I think is great because he's talking to Grimner about the dead between the living. Well, between is Grimner and Elias is the king, Prester John, but Joshua is referring to Elias's dead wife, right? Which I think that's the gulf between the brothers. Because Joshua failed at some point, failed his brother at some point, which ended up, I think, losing his sister-in-law, I guess the word, sister, right. Brother's wife. I just thought that was a good line. That feels a little bit throwaway, but it's got a lot of weight to it because it carries so much gravity. So few words.
It's right after that scene where they're dueling, and I don't know, my inexpert civilian take on the duel was that Joshua, he's fighting it one-handed, and he only slid away from the fight right at the very end because he just doesn't have two hands, and he just can't hold a two-handed sword with the same grip his brother has. So he seems to be the more skilled swordsman, but if you are a one-handed swordsman, you can't really hold a shield. You can't do all the moves that another, a two-handed man could. So there's a lot of loss there.
Is that a bit of foreshadowing, right? If Joshua's not going to go, toe to toe with it up against his brother directly, is he going to back down because he's seen as the weaker of the two? I don't know.
He's got to do something differently because he can't take him on a head-on fight.
Yeah, and he is technically the rightful heir, I guess. Elias is. He is the elder brother. Right. And then this is again a more slow burn, right? Simon eats a bunch of bread. Get some news about the princess, who we've not seen a whole lot of. Princess Miriam. Right?
He gets it through the words of this young woman that he has a crush on or whatever. She's talking about the princess. Yeah, she's talking about the princess. Have you heard about
and he likes her, but then she finds out she likes some soldier. He's like emotionally crushed.
Which starts him on the I'm going to be a soldier sequence of things, which doesn't work out for him.
I thought it was very well written from a teenage boy point of view, right? Even though his heart is crushed, he's like, well, that's what women like, right? So I'm going to be a soldier.
Yeah.
It leads him right along that path. So
very realistic.
Yep. And then I think Morganis gets a little bit of news at the end. I don't know if you remember what the feather means.
Oh, from the bird. Ooh,
yes. I don't know if you know what the bird messages mean, Scott, if you remember that.
I can't remember, but I thought it was some sort of code.
It's not a code, and I don't want to give too much away.
It's a little note
for Lauren, but it's a bit of that.
Page 105.
Like a society, you remember?
Yeah, kind of like a watchword type thing.
Yeah.
The white foxes are awake again, and in the darkness they trouble the children.
Yeah.
I have also sent winged words to our smallest friend, but I doubt they will find him unawares. Someone has been knocking at dangerous doors. So, and we've been hearing Dr. Margani's talk about knocking on doors too.
Mm-hmm.
When Simon
that's the metaphor of messing with magic.
Messing with
magic. Knowing what you're doing, right? Yeah.
Right. If you open up a door, you don't get to decide on the house guests. I think at some point.
Was it like the vampires, right? Once you invite them in, it's really tough to get them out.
Yeah. Never invite a vampire inside your house.
I learned that from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And then we just jump right into chapter 8, right? Did you have any, favorite lines from chapter 7 before we go to 8?
Just that I noticed that there's a lot of bird signaling, right? If someone is interested in birds, if someone's kind to birds, if someone's like a bird, good guy. If someone's like eating birds and crunching on their bones. Bad guy.
That guy.
That's very interesting, and I wonder if
good.
that's intentional or subconscious.
Yeah.
Stomping on dogs also makes you a bad
Stomping
guy.
on dogs,
Also
very
bad.
bad.
Very
That's very, very clear signal. Don't like that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy's got to go.
Next is chapter 8, bitter air and sweet. This is where Simon. This is just as you said, Lauren and Scott. Simon and Jeremiah try to become soldiers by forging a letter.
They're using their education.
There you go. See?
To write a letter and to try to trick someone, and fortunately it fails.
Fortunately.
Yes.
And we know it's fortunate because is this the guy who's eating birds and crunching on their bones?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Bird bone cruncher.
That's the way the character's introduced. And once I read that, I was like, bad guy right there. I mean, I like to eat chicken, but it's not described that way.
What Ken was talking about earlier is through the perspective of a 14-year-old boy, because he's like, this guy's a deadly swordsman. But when he physically sees him, he's just kind of a big slob with really delicate hands. And he's like, yeah, but he's probably killed more people than the plague with those hands. And no, that guy hasn't done anything. He's a loser.
Yeah, McGinnis says that. It's like, these guys just sit around on their ass all the time. You think it's all about war? It's a lot of nothing.
Yeah.
These guys are nobody. If you want to be somebody important, you got to learn how to read and write. Go to school, kids.
Go to school.
Get an education.
Said like a dad.
Yeah. Go stay in school. Don't do drugs.
Exactly.
So again, Simon sees Malachias.
Yeah,
and then he finds he's chasing him through Urchester, right? Through the city. And then instead of finding Malachias, what does he find?
A dying girl. Yeah.
And that's like dies. A kind of a jolting shock to him because he's a castle rat, right? He's a child, a scullion who's in the protected walls of the king's
he offers to help, and they get really mad at him and tell him to go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the old man basically tells him, don't help. You're gonna make it worse.
Yeah.
We don't need your help.
And he's just a kid, right? What can he really do? To be honest.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what strikes Simon the most is that they looked at me like they hated me, Simon murmured, puzzled and upset. And that's kind of the what sticks with him. It's not, sorrow over the little girl that died, but like all the peasant city folk around him are staring at him, and he sees their angry, sorrowful looks, and he takes it personally.
Yeah, you don't see he's a kid, right? He's like, why are they mad at me? But it doesn't. I don't think it clicks with him just yet. Yeah.
Right.
And then there's the dream.
Yeah.
Really interesting scene where it's a dream that switches into the POV of Dukas Grimner, right? Which I thought was really odd, right? Because it's Simon's dream,
right?
But when he wakes up, it's Grimner's point of view, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
Switch. I don't know if you noticed that or not. Yeah.
The dream was pretty.
That was but it had a lot of. It could mean nothing and everything, right?
Right.
And as writers try to steep meaning into dreams, I think it's almost a bad crutch I've used it a few times in stories where dreams have meaning. Dreams can be prophetic, or dreams can honestly just be nothing, a whole lot of nothing. So it's really hard to take, hard to not want to take something out of this.
It's like when you dream and you wake up, you get a great story idea and you write it down kind of on the tail end of that dream. And then you look at it in the morning, you're like, that was dumb. That wasn't nearly as cool as I thought it was. When I wrote it down.
Wasn't that good?
Yeah, it wasn't as brilliant as I thought it was at 4 a.m.
Yeah, but the strange thing about this dream, so Scribner wakes him up and he says, you're waking everyone up. But then inside his head, he says, actually, the boy hasn't really wakened anyone. The rest of them have been tossing and moaning since I walked in. Like they were all having the same nightmare. What a strange night.
I thought that was the strangest part of the dream. Like,
Yeah, to me, I took that as a kind of a harbinger of some dark magic is coming their way. It's, something's happening.
This gives me Worm Tongue vibes.
Right.
If you remember the scenes with, what's the king? My brain is blanking. The Rohirrim.
Right.
This gives me vibes of that, but like before he actually was really truly under the thrall of Worm Tongue and Saruman, right? I feel like this is going down that path of consuming the kingdom. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kind of Harry Potter, where they're in your dreams and stuff.
There's a great line. I put this in the chat beginning, right? Where there is a queer air in the halls of this house tonight. Right? I think that comes from Lucas Grimner.
Yeah.
And I think we get a couple more scenes where they go into the Kinswood.
Well, they find the dead guy.
Another dead body. 2 dead bodies in one chapter. The dead child, and this time a dead Rimmersman, right?
He's been murdered or shot with an arrow. That's been concealed. Crime scene's been tampered with.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask you, what does the policeman think about this crime scene?
This crime scene. Because they said that
he's been dead for a while.
Well, they broke off the arrow.
Mm-hmm.
So that because as though they didn't want, it's kind of a big jump on the whoever was the POV character in that scene. I can remember thinking that would somebody in this setting make that, because like we would think that right away because we're used to crime documentaries, but would you think that way as a medieval peasant? It's like, somebody's trying to conceal what they did by taking the evidence, but maybe that's fairly obvious. But it does set up that there's something foul work at play, and then later as Grimsner realizes it's one of his soldiers by some sort of bone damage or something that had happened, some sort of prior injury. So kind of a layman's version of dental records, I guess.
Yeah. I hit that guy, and he's got the same mark. Where
I knocked off his arm.
Yeah, I knocked off 2 of his teeth. Those same 2 teeth are missing.
I got those teeth in my pocket. They match.
But
this was the guy he sent with a message, right? He was sending with a message to his son.
Yes, he was not just a Rimmersman or one of his people, I guess, or one of his liegemen.
Right.
He was his messenger.
And so maybe you guys got it and I didn't, but I was like, did he get killed before he delivered the message or after he delivered the message? Or when he was on his way back?
Was he on his way out or on his way in?
So I don't know because it's been there a while, so it could be either, I guess, for the purposes of the story plot line.
Yeah. So just a segue, just as an aside, in the later sequel, this scene plays out in a different way. It's many years later, but there is a character shot with an arrow in the woods, but she lives. But that's the beginning of the story for the sequel, which I thought was interesting. It's in the same woods,
That's a dangerous place to go. You need to keep your kids
don't go in the woods, man. People's arrows coming out of nowhere. And then there's just some hints of like bad weather, plagues, just an ailing kingdom is what we're getting in this chapter, I think.
Right.
Bad signs, bad omens, bad things happening to the land, bad weather. And then we go into chapter 9, I think. Which is Smoke on the Wind. Which I think is actually comes at the end of the chapter, right? Actual smoke on the wind.
I referenced that earlier where he sees the smoke that instead of showing us what happened, they just kind of tell us about it.
Yep. Yeah. In this chapter, this is where, in the previous chapter, Simon and Jeremiah want to be soldiers. In this one, they try to play the game and they get shut down. And then I think
Is this where Morganus tells him what an idiot he is, and
yep.
Yeah, you want to be part of that crew. They just murdered 600 villagers and burned them and blah 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 blah.
Well, then but there before that though is there's a scene, there's the council scene with Isgrimnur, and this is where you actually get to see Count Eolair, who is another really important character in the overall arc of the series. He's a bit of a foil to Isgrimnur. They're very much kind of think of them as the old guard, right? Elias is surround himself with the young pups and folks that are his people, and Isgrimnur and Eolair, while they are liegemen to the king, you feel like they're kind of on the outs, right? They're liege to the High King, but the High King doesn't regard them highly, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a great line. There's a great this I thought this was a funny line in here. Great dialogue where they're arguing. Isgrimnur is talking and the Count is talking, and then Isgrimnur says, I think, well, he growled at last, tilting his head defiantly. Should I speak first, or will you? And then the reply is, there is no need to worry. Who will speak first? The Count said.
keep going. I was going to call out this section too.
Oh yeah. Then he goes, for a moment, the flush of Eolair's face, the color in his high, thin cheekbones reminded the older man of something he had seen once, years ago. A haunting figure glimpsed across 50 years of Rimmersgard snow. One of the white foxes, my father called that one. Isgrimnur wondered if the old stories were true, that there really was Scythy blood in the Hernistiri noble houses.
Ooh.
Yeah, so you get more hints of the white foxes, right? The Scythy, which are the I think they're not hinted at or called the Norns yet, but they're the white foxes are the Norns.
Well, now he's also connecting them with the Scythy too, which I hadn't noticed before. You just read that part.
Is he Scythy? Is he not?
Are the white? I mean, the white foxes sound bad because we've been warned about them, right? In the note. So they sound like bad guys.
And Simon has talked about the Scythy. There are hints that the Scythy created the Green Angel Tower, right? Asua.
Right. Used to be at the Hayhold, used to reign there before they left or got kicked out.
I think they were. I think Prester John drove them out. I could be wrong, because the description of the Hayhold was multiple conquerors building over top of what was there before. Right. So maybe he didn't drive out the Scythy, but whoever had been there before. Yeah.
Right. Before the men reigned there, the Scythy reigned there, and then there was actually someone, it sounds like before that too. But the Scythy just kind of sound sort of like Tolkien's elves. They sort of sound like elves to me, which they're not necessarily bad yet. I don't have the information to know if they're good guys or bad guys yet. I'm still figuring that out. But now that they're connected to the White Fox, I'm kind of wondering about at least these.
You're getting that layers of world building, but you're not until you encounter an actual Scythy. This is all what everybody says.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's rumors of rumors.
Much of a richer experience when you do meet them, because now you're going to have all this kind of backstory layered in. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the journey where that comes up. I think Laura will like that as well. I think that was it for chapter. The end of chapter 9 is. I think maybe we missed talking about something that was in chapter 8, where Isgrimnur's looking for Towser. That's where the weird dream happens. And why is he looking for Towser? Because he's looking for Prince Joshua. And Prince Joshua is gone.
Oh yeah, that's right. And it's why did he leave in the middle of the night? He was supposed to tell me, but then he just left.
Yep. And then it's been a few months later, I think, in chapter 9, and it still hangs in the air it weighs on Duke Isgrimnur's mind, right?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm glad you brought that up because I remember that. But when I was reading today, I was like, what happened to Prince Joshua? I couldn't remember, but I remember that very vividly now. Like, why did he just...
do you wonder, did he leave?
I hope he
is
didn't
in
get
the
shot with
hole?
arrow in the Kingswood.
Yeah, is he in the Kingswood? Because people die in there.
The place is dangerous. His body's everywhere in there.
His body's
Somebody
everywhere in the
should search that
Kingswood.
place.
That's like the Forbidden Forest.
Yeah.
And then I took a little note from Simon's point of view right at the very end when where he sees Fallshire burning.
Right.
And why it was Fallshire burning, because some of ALS's men were sent there to bring back the sheep to feed the castle, right? And they didn't want
Which
to.
was unpopular because those people are also hungry.
Yes. And
everybody's hungry right now.
Yep. And then you see that it's burning, right? And I think the little line I got from Simon at the end of there was that it was a thought from inside his own head, which speaks almost directly to the reader, right? I don't want to be a child forever, do I? I think that was his argument against not getting denied to be a soldier, right? I don't want to be a child forever. So, I don't know. Any other thoughts on chapter 9? I thought that was again a passing of time. It feels like it's been almost a year, I think, now since the king has passed. Time has really gone. I think you needed that time to see that the new king's has got a rough start. The land is not. The land disagrees. Yeah, he doesn't think so.
The king thinks everything's great.
Yeah, this is great.
People tell him it's bad, and he's like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah,
this
guy says it's great.
Yeah. And I didn't latch on to the passage of time as strongly as I probably should have, because I felt a little bit lost, mostly because I forgot Joshua left, and I was tracking things, and I was getting a little bit bumped around. But also, it makes more sense when I look back at it that, yes, a lot of time has passed, and I don't think I factored that in as a reason.
He has to give you some of the months or the holidays that happen because the weather is so messed up that it's hard to tell actually what time of year it really is, right? Because it's hot, it's dry, it's not raining. They're finding things that are growing because it's out of season, that kind of stuff. So,
well, I knew that Simon is getting a little bit older because he's more and more interested in girls.
Yes, he's probably 15-ish now, right?
Yeah,
15, maybe.
Which means 16. He's basically retarded because
he's got 15-year-old. Yeah, he's learning to read and write, but he's also getting dumber.
Yeah, somebody took your brain and threw it out the window.
Girls. Okay, so chapter 10, the last chapter for this reading, is King Hemlock, which is very ominous for a chapter heading.
Because isn't hemlock a poison?
Yes.
Hemlock is
that is what Socrates drank, right?
Which is funny in the song.
I drank what?
Well, yeah.
Famous last words.
Yeah, and Towser sings a little song about hemlock.
It was a little story of Prince Hemlock and Prince Holly, right?
But you're like, with a name like Hemlock, there's got to be some poisoning involved.
Yes. What is going on here? You didn't even get to finish the story. I was really interested.
It'd be like having a character that's named Arson, and you're like, why is everything burning in this story? That's just so weird.
I like that. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, my name is Arson.
But he's just the guy who gets accused of it all. He's not actually the one that does it.
Right.
Go ahead, Lauren. You sound like you want to point out something.
Oh no, I was just checking out the song.
I did want to ask a question. What your thoughts are with chapter titles, chapter names? I'm a huge fan of them, but I know there are, especially in science fiction, it seems to be not favored as much as fantasy.
Oh, yes.
My problem with titles is I did titles in the first several books that I did, but then as the series got longer, now you're talking, you got to come up with like 150 titles, because you have 3 books and every book has 30 or 40 or 50 chapters, and so you're coming up with these, and that wasn't even that bad because I like it. I enjoyed it as part of the writing process. But when I went back to format the book, I found that I had sometimes used titles and sometimes I didn't. So then I had to to make a match, now I have to, out of the blue, I have to figure out the 35 titles for book 2 where I didn't use the titles. And I eventually just quit using them because they gave me a headache to format. I think they can be very, very powerful, and they probably are a good tool to focus you on what that chapter is about if you're using them correctly. They're probably a good thing for a writer.
I think so. I think I enjoy it for fantasy because it always puts in a tiny question, in your head, like King Hemlock. Well, who is this about? Which king? What's this going to be about? This should be good.
Yeah, if you look at the chapter titles and then read the chapter, you'll start to notice that the chapter title points to the central idea or the central symbol, the central plot device in that chapter, but it's kind of in code. You got to figure out what it refers to.
If you wrote out all of the chapter titles, would they tell a story by themselves?
No, because you'd have to figure out the code first,
right?
Figure out what the symbol represents, and then you would have a story. It's true. So that's kind of cool. But for me, with fantasy, it seems like with this reading experience, so much of what we're doing as readers is we're trying to find all the little clues and figure out what they mean. So on one hand, we're immersing ourselves in the world and we've got our imaginations kind of taken over and we're kind of imagining these characters and what it feels like to be them. But then the other part of our brain, the analytical part, is scrambling to find all the clues and put them together, put the pieces together, detectives, and trying to figure out what it means. And the chapter titles are just another example of that. King Hemlock, why Hemlock, and who's the king and who's it referring to? We just had a change of king, so it could have mean something else,
because you assume it's from an old story or something. But I think the chapters things are neat. But I was just, as we're talking, I'm thinking about my own reader, as a reader, not as a writer.
Right.
I don't really pay attention to the titles of chapters. I mean, I look at them, oh, cool, and then I go on. I don't put a lot of weight on it. Unless
it's completely an optional thing, right? No,
right.
You don't have to do it.
I have for this book, but for other books, I might not pay attention at all. And for other books, it might even be distracting. But I think for this one, it's working for me.
Well, in some books, you do that. We talk the epistolary or whatever, where you have a little phrases and quotes and a little bit of a letter or something at the beginning, which I think is neat. But as a writer, I've done that, and it becomes really cumbersome to come up with a letter or an epistolary type thing for hundreds of chapters.
Yeah, Brandon Sanderson did that for the Final Empire, right? Which was the first Mistborn book.
And I always found that when Brandon Sanderson does, I always find that hugely distracting and kind of I read it in another language. I have no idea what that even pertains to, and then I just read the chapter. But
the other option, George R. R. Martin, I don't think he did that, but what I think he did is the title of the chapter was the POV,
right?
Tyrion, Jaime, if I remember correctly.
Because it would be the same, because you'd have the title of a chapter could be Tyrion 15 times where you're at in the book.
Right. Yeah, I've been struggling with the POV. I'm doing the names. I'm not saying the names. I'm titling the chapters, but I struggle with the POVs, and I'm learning as a newer author. I'm kind of bouncing between POVs, but not trying to change them too often. So I'm writing. The way I'm doing it with my new series is you get a couple of 2 to 3 chapters from one POV before it goes to the next POV, and then it comes back. It basically goes between 2 POVs through the books.
The way Tad's doing it is he'll have the chapter's quite long, maybe 20 pages, 25 pages, and it'll be divided up into 5 scenes, and each scene will have maybe a different POV or even maybe a couple of the same POVs with Simon like in a row.
Yeah,
So each POV
time jumps. Yeah.
Each POV section's kind of short, which means that we're getting different angles of the same event, like the funeral, for example, and we're not losing track of the different plot lines because they're all pretty tightly woven.
Yeah,
it
that's
makes
nice.
it a little easier for me to follow along, so I'm not like forgetting what happened with the last POV character because it wasn't 17 pages ago. It was only like 3, so that kind of helps me.
The problem I had with like when George R. R. Martin does that, when you're with, because if you're reading a POV you like,
yes,
but then you switch to one you don't really care for, and you know you
Exactly.
got 25 pages of it ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I don't want to complain about another author, but oh my God, I did not like Feast of Crows. George R. R. Martin's Feast of Crows, because it had all of the characters I did not like or care about.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking
in one book.
Yeah.
Because he wrote, I think he wrote Dance with Dragons and Feast of Crows together. It was a massive, and I don't know, between him and his editor, they decided how to break it up, and I think it was like break it up by continent or something, which was just uninteresting to me.
That threw me, even though I'm a huge fan of that. That was my biggest struggle, was reading through large sections of my less favorite characters or places.
Agreed. But when the characters' voices are strong and interesting, that can be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And a lot of times I will come on board with it. Like I'm like, this character's not what I was that excited about. But then I start to get invested in them, and I kind of change. I'm like, okay, now I'm into this character. But then we change to a new character. So that's a danger. It's a danger.
For this book, what's kind of cool is when you get the behind the scenes look, the reader knows information about the character and what the character's thinking and what their true motivations are, but the other characters don't.
Do not. Yeah.
So it allows Tad to set up some dramatic irony where you might be hoping that Simon makes a choice, but he doesn't have the information you do as a reader. So as a reader, you're like, do this, or don't do that. Trying to shout through the pages, but there's nothing you can do because Simon's going to make his own choice.
Yeah, so talking about Simon, let's talk about what he does in this chapter. So in the beginning, he's summoned to Morgana's, and there's a tiny scene there with Inch.
Yeah.
With Inch, which I feel like is almost like a Hodor type character.
Yeah.
I know he's probably not, but I really want him to be an actual Gollum.
A Gollum.
because he's kind of, because like, so if I was writing it, he's got these things where he smells stony. And, you know, that could be just a throwaway, like, yeah, this guy smells like he's got his hands in the dirt all the time or something. But he also just stands there like a statue and waits for him to come back. And that could be because he's a simpleton, but it could also be because he's a Gollum.
Gollum, right? Yeah.
Or
gargoyle.
Some sort of creature of magic. And I can't remember. It's, like I said, it's been literally 30 years since I read this. It's like I'm reading it for the first time. It really is. So that's good.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and this is where Morgana's catches Simon in the act, right?
Yeah. Inch is one of my favorite characters, and we're probably not going to see hardly anything from him.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I forgot what this character did, if anything at all. So
yeah, probably nothing.
Probably not a lot. Yeah.
So Morgana's
I read ahead, so I won't say. Keep reading, guys.
Morgana's catches. Yeah, thanks, Lord. Morgana's catches brings up that he knows. Hey, by the way, I know that you tried to go off and be a soldier with my letter.
Yeah.
Is that right? Is that this chapter?
Yep. I caught you, and I think this is the moment, at least to me as a reader, I think this was the moment that I caught where Simon grows up just a tiny bit because he is so embarrassed about getting caught, and then he's angry about it, but then he apologizes, which was a turning for him as a character, right? He swallows his anger and his embarrassment, and he apologizes, right? Which I thought was a good moment for him, because I think really kind of up until this point, he's been doing things helplessly, right? You know, he tried to save the dog, but that didn't work. And he wanted to save the baby, but he couldn't, right? Because they told him to go away, that kind of stuff, right? And just little things where he was just a bystander. And here he's gotten caught trying to do something, and he's got to own up to it, or continue being a child and throwing a fit about it.
I'm hoping that's the case with him, and I'm sure that he is, because it's very intentional things. But I really would like for Simon to do more, or I don't know. I don't want to complain about the main character, but I'm having a hard time getting really invested in Simon at this.
Well, he hasn't gone on the journey yet, right? If this is Bilbo, he was out the door by the second chapter, right? Your second or third chapter.
Yeah,
hey,
that's also that seltzer water. I'm drinking Diet Coke, but when I was reading, I was like, I need to tune everybody out and get this last chapter read. So I put on my headphones and put my writing music on, and I had one of these while I was reading, which I haven't really done that for a long time. And I'm like, I'm grown up. I work at home. I'm going to drink this Polliner, which is brewed in Germany.
I think next time we do a book chat, we should all have a drink with us.
Do like a drink review or something.
A frosty beverage.
I do have a drink, but it's boring.
Yeah, mine might be water.
Boring one too, but now I'm interested in having a more interesting drink.
Right.
It's kind of my life's blood all day long. I'm drinking water, so much water.
So much
real
water.
drinker.
The summer, for goodness sake.
You're hitting that
I've been
water
drinking
sauce, that H2O really hits you.
I had the flu all week, so I've been just drowning myself in fluids, trying to get through that.
So the alcohol fixes that.
Yeah.
I heard alcohol.
Well, one at the end of your typhoid session, you can have one. But, yeah. Anyway, I get up and drink 2-3 glasses of water first thing before I do anything else.
I
do have talking about how Simon had a growing up moment. He's been begging Morghanes for power, through magic, and now he sees that he's made a mistake. He's kind of humbled himself a little bit. But
then he says, "I want to learn magic. I want to learn magic."
For acting like a child.
Morghanes says, "You don't understand," and then you get a little bit more blatant. Stating by Morghanes, magic has a cost, and some people don't understand the cost.
And I feel like this particular exchange is where Simon does kind of start to get it, where he's like he feels, because in the past it's always been kind of like almost jokingly back, teach me magic, no, you're too dumb, teach me magic, no, you're or whatever. Yeah. But now he gives him those reasons, and it's like Simon hears them for the first time, and he's like, seems to take it seriously. So I'm very interested in that. And there was the thing where he talks about, what he says, that is my favorite passage. If I could find it, of course.
Well, go ahead and read it if you can find it.
If I can find it. You guys might find it before I do.
Don't you teach me the laws? For the same reason, I wouldn't give a burning torch to an infant sitting on a pile of straw. The infant, and no insult is meant, Simon, is not prepared for the responsibility. Only those who have studied many years in many other subjects and disciplines can begin to master the art that fascinates you so. Even then, they are not necessarily fit to wield any power. The old man drank again, wiped his lips, and smiled. By the time most of us are capable of using the art, we are old enough to know better. It is too dangerous for the young, Simon, which we heard Pyrates is young.
Yeah.
But if you say, but Pyrates, I shall kick you, Morghanes said. I told you once he is a madman, or as good as. He sees only the power to be gained from wielding the art and ignores the consequences. Ask me about the consequences, Simon. He asked dully. What about the You cannot exert force without paying for it, Simon. If you steal a pie, someone else goes hungry. If you ride a horse too fast, the horse dies. If you use the art to open doors, Simon, you have little choice of house guests.
That's Simon, the part I was really like. I was like, oh, okay, this says a lot about what Pyrates is doing.
Mm-hmm. This is Obi-Wan teaching Luke about the Force, right?
Yeah.
Right. It surrounds us, it binds us, but anger and hatred, the dark side. There's a dark side to the Force, right? So
there's a lightsaber.
Magic has a cost, and if you don't understand the cost, bad things come to you at night. There was one really line that my favorite line is in this scene where Morgana says, "You, boy, devise questions like God makes flies and poor people in droves."
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
That was good.
That was a good line.
How do you say you talk too much without saying?
Yeah, exactly. How do you cleverly say you talk too much, kid? Oh my gosh, that was a good line.
Yeah.
That's a good. I think that just is a great mentor scene. I think.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's the best mentor scene of the book so far. I'm starting to get more hooked into it as the scene is. I feel it's got more grit. It's great. It's getting.
Yeah, well, when you see first Morganus and Simon's younger, and he's just the scullion, and he's just there to hear stories.
Right.
And now he's an apprentice learning to read and write, learning to help out, but he's not ready for any magic.
He wants to be a man, be an adult, and he's starting to get some hard lessons, and he's starting to listen.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And then you find out also the truth of what happened at Fallshire, right? They didn't just burn the sheep, right? They burned everything, women, children, animals.
And then bragged about it. Like they had a great victory.
And I think that was a lesson for Morganus to use on Simon, right? This is why you don't want to be not that you shouldn't want to be a soldier, but you don't want to be that kind of soldier.
You don't want to be with this group.
Yeah, you don't want to be with that group. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, again, he's still sheltered, so I don't know if it has that much of an impact yet, but I don't think Simon liked the idea of killing women and children for fun.
No.
So, and then that weird small scene of, so this is the showing of passing of time. There's this that tiny scene of the loud crashing noise heard at night, and it's on All Fool's Day, which is, if the analogy holds, it's April. So time has passed into spring, right? So, right on the heels of a discussion of magic and cost is this small scene. 3 paragraphs. That's it. I don't know if that gave you guys any ideas of what happened or not, but.
I had my thoughts. I have to go back and make sure
I haven't read ahead, and it's been 30 years since you and I have read it, Scott. But if I remember correctly, he's fooling with something that it's older parts of the castle than back to the city.
It comes back to that opening doors and leaving them open and getting things you didn't get in the bonus plan. Dark magic, and I got the bonus plan. This wasn't what I asked for at all.
I didn't want this.
What are these demons doing here, or whatever?
Yeah,
dragons, or fire elementals, or whatever we're dealing with.
I've made a grave mistake.
Oopsies.
This is not as much fun as I thought.
And then that scene ends pretty quickly, and then Simon has another dream, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a little bit more of a strange dream. If you remember that one.
I just read
he's climbing a black rock. Well, Scott, since you just read this one, we can talk a little bit more about this one. This is where he's like climbing the black rock, where something is waiting for him.
Right.
What is waiting for him? We don't know, right? Because he wakes up.
Something.
Yeah. And I think that dream kind of mates up with the weird sound from the short sound in the previous scene. I think these scenes kind of interlock together, right? Magic has a cost, a sound happens, and then Simon has the dream, and nobody makes sense of the dream except the
stable boy.
The stable boy, what's considered the village idiot.
Yeah,
or not
no,
village idiot, but simple, I guess is the word, is
Yeah.
the term.
They don't
Shem's
put a lot of
slow-witted assistant.
Yeah. But I think also often we see this in movies, right? Or in stories where the simple often has there's not complications in what they see, right? They just they see something, they interpret it. They're not they convey it. They are not interpreting anything. People think they call them simple or fools,
they're just
but
reporting
maybe they're
facts
just reporting what they see, right? They're just they're just a conduit for knowledge.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting that only the stable boy and nobody believes the stable boy.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. Maybe you should listen to that guy.
I'm trying to think of a movie where the kid sees like a dinosaur or something, and they're like, "Yeah, whatever." I can't remember which movie that's in, but I do remember some scenes like that.
It'll come back to you.
Yeah.
And then the audience with the new High King. Again, I thought this was harkens back to very worm tongue vibes.
Yeah.
In Lands of the Rohirrim. It's going to come to me later. Of course, I'm going to kick myself. But yeah, where he's talking to Towser and he's got his cronies around him, his liegemen, and of course, Pryrates is right at his elbow, right? Talking right into his ear.
Theoden is the name.
Theoden, thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, King Theoden. Yep. And then the black casket reference I thought was really strange.
It's kind of the Land and the King are one reference right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She's off theory and clearly.
And then I think I think this is where we went into the Holly and Hemlock. The two princes.
You're kind of worried about Towser's future welfare. Like he might
it's like if you make fun of the king, or if you try an allegory that seems a little too obvious.
And also, we found out where Towser got his name from.
Yep.
He's named for a dog, so.
Yeah, he took the dog's name.
The short jester,
the dog Indiana,
who tells the truth,
the jester Towser,
who barks when he sees a bad guy's on the horizon. Took the name of a dog, and now it's him against Pirates in this scene. Who's going to tell the truth and who's whispering lies.
Yeah, Pryrates whispers in his ear, but Towser's doing it through allegory, right? Which he's not trying to. I don't think he's outright trying to tell the king he's Hemlock or Holly, but I don't think he wins in this.
He gets a reaction.
Yeah. He basically gets the "get out of my face" line at the end, right?
Yeah.
Get thee hence.
Get thee hence. Or you get thee dead.
So what did you think overall, I guess, of these chapters? Still very slow burn. We're still we're on the plane, but we're still taxiing down the runway. Yeah. We haven't even taken off yet. In terms of story.
Some really beautiful writing and an amazingly robust world. And I'm trying to find my character I'm going to latch on to. I haven't found one yet. And I know Simon's obviously, because you have other characters, in my opinion, besides the main character that you latch on to. Like, I like Hemsgard, what's Eskerard, or what's the Viking?
Scribnar.
Scribnar.
Duke Scribnar, yeah.
I think I'm
like
gonna
him.
like him. I think I'm going to like him.
Scribnar, yeah.
Yeah, he
Scribnar,
gives me Beowulf vibes.
Yeah.
The grizzled old soldier.
Do you remember
nobility.
Angus? Do you remember the actor? Oh gosh, he was in. I think he was in Game of Thrones actually.
Right.
He played the Lord that was teaching Jon Snow.
Oh yeah.
when he first came as the Black Watch, if you remember that.
I remember, but I can't remember
that actor. That's the actor that pops in my head.
Okay.
When you think of
is Grimlock.
Grimlock.
So I like him. I'm curious about Inch, even though we'll see what happens. But it's more,
there's a lot of background characters that you don't actually see yet, right? Miriam L is still very much in the shadows.
And I really want to see what's going on with her, and I suspect that she'll be an important part of the story.
Yep, she becomes important. Malachias is still kind of one of those shadowy figures that we don't seem to get a hold of. It just seems to be something that drives a scene to it, from one part to another, or ends a scene, at least lately. But I like these scenes. There's still a lot of world building, a lot of you're very steeped into the world, into the characters. You're getting invested in the world itself, but you haven't left the hay-hole, neither as reader or as a character, right? Because everything is in the hay-hole or in Urchester. I mean, even the stuff that happens in Fallshire is all secondhand knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Nothing is actually happening, and I don't think you're going to get that until Simon is forced to, start his journey. We'll see where that goes.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So next reading will be 11 through 15.
Yep.
I think we're already 20% into the book, into the story. This is chapter 10 is 20% into the book. Although you feel like you haven't gotten anywhere yet, I think you've gotten a lot of the world and a lot of the characters, but there's not action because you have essentially a young protagonist, right? And he has to go on
That's
a journey.
a popular fantasy trope is the young child that's going to be
chosen one,
or whatever.
The orphan child
with the hidden power, the hidden significance,
with some kind of shadowy past,
who's met the mentor,
who has the mentor, maybe he has a destiny,
the old curmudgeon mentor, who's become my favorite currently.
You like Morganus? Yes.
I do like him. Well, because he's a likable character because he knows what's going on.
Yeah, well, we love curmudgeons. We just especially like good-hearted ones, and he fits it perfectly.
Yes, he almost reminds me of the remember the Billy Crystal character in in Princess Bride.
Yeah. I'm not a witch. I'm your wife.
We're not home.
Nice. I need to watch that again. I tried to get my kids into it, and we'll see if I get to watch it.
But yeah, so 11 through 15 next time.
Right.
If you're reading along, enjoy it. If you're listening along, I think you're really going to enjoy that, but I think you're going to miss some of the finer words, finer passages, I guess, rather than overreading it. Although I don't think that either reading or listening is bad. I think any sort of reading is good reading. If you get lost in the world, that's certainly
even better.
Huge plus, right? But I think we start to see the pieces are on the board. I think we're going to start seeing both pieces appear and pieces start to move, right? We already see one piece move off the board.
Yeah, John.
Too soon, Ken. Too soon.
He's in the woods.
Yeah, he's got an arrow at him in the woods.
I didn't say he was gone, but it's just like multi-dimensional chess, right? There's pieces of the board that you don't see that come back, back onto the board. So This has been fun. I think we went a little bit longer than we wanted to, but really got into talking about the story and really enjoyed it.
A lot to cover in this one and whatnot. So.
Yeah, there's a lot to chew on. There's not a lot of, again, time is the big piece that moves here, right? Time is passing. It's been a year in these 5 chapters. So things will start to move. It's got to.
I'm going to go round up my dog and see what she's barking at and get to it. But
all right.
Thanks for the chat, and we'll do it again next week.
Yeah, we'll do this again next week. All right. Thanks, everyone. And keep reading. Have a great night.
Have a good night, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Maybe.